The sound of weeping carried through the dusty twilight air of Cherry Creek, Colorado, cutting through the September evening like a mournful song that made Zachary Owens pause mid-step as he approached the wooden gate of his ranch. The year was 1878, and in all his 32 years on this earth, he had never heard such soul-deep sorrow from another human being. His weathered hand rested on the gate latch as he peered through the gathering darkness to see a young woman collapsed against his fence post, her shoulders shaking with the force of her tears, her dark traveling dress covered in dust from the road. "Madam." His voice came out rougher than intended, unused to speaking much after months of solitary living since his brother had left for California. "Madam, are you hurt?" The woman's head jerked up, revealing a face streaked with tears and dirt, framed by auburn hair that had fallen loose from what had once been a proper bun. Her eyes, even red-rimmed and swollen, were the most striking shade of green he had ever seen, like new grass after spring rain. She could not have been more than 25, and the terror in those eyes made something protective stir in his chest. "Please," she managed between gasping sobs, "please, I have nowhere else to go. They took everything. My father is dead and they burned our homestead. I have been walking since dawn, and yours is the first home I have found." Zachary did not hesitate. He swung the gate open wide and stepped forward, offering his hand to help her stand. She flinched initially, then seemed to see something in his face that reassured her, because she placed her trembling hand in his calloused palm and allowed him to pull her to her feet. She swayed immediately, and he caught her elbow to steady her. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler this time. "When did you last eat or drink?" "Yesterday morning, I think." Her words were barely a whisper. "I am not certain anymore." He guided her through the gate, latching it behind them with his free hand while keeping his other arm supporting her weight as they walked the 100 yards to his modest ranch house. It was not much, just a 4-room structure built of wood and stone that he had constructed himself over the past 5 years, but it was solid and warm and safe, which seemed to be exactly what this woman needed. Inside, he settled her into the rocking chair by the cold hearth and immediately set about building a fire despite the lingering warmth from the day. She needed light and comfort more than heat. Then he fetched water from the kitchen pump and brought her a tin cup, watching carefully as she drank in small, desperate sips. "Slow," he cautioned. "You will make yourself sick." She nodded, lowering the cup with visible effort. Now that they were in the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her current disheveled state, and everything to do with the strength he could see beneath the fear. Her hands, though shaking, had calluses that spoke of hard work. This was no pampered city woman. "My name is Zachary Owens," he said, crouching down to her level rather than looming over her. "This ranch is mine and you are safe here. Nobody will harm you under my roof. Can you tell me your name?" "Beatrice," she said, her voice cracking. "Beatrice Everett. My father and I had a homestead about 15 miles east of here, near the creek that runs through the canyon. We have been there for 3 years, trying to build a life after my mother passed back in Missouri. Yesterday morning, men came, 6 of them with faces covered. They said our land was theirs now, that we had no legal claim. Papa tried to reason with them, showed them our deed from the land office. They shot him." Her voice broke entirely on the last word, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Zachary felt anger rise in his gut, hot and sharp. He had heard of claim jumpers working this territory, men who used violence and intimidation to steal land from those who could not fight back. The law in Cherry Creek was stretched thin, with Sheriff Morrison trying to cover too much territory with too few deputies. "They shot him in our doorway," Beatrice continued, seeming unable to stop now that she had started. I tried to go to him, but one of them grabbed me. He said they had plans for me, that a woman alone would fetch a good price in Denver. But then another one of them, the leader I think, told him no. Said there had been enough trouble already. They argued, and while they were distracted, I ran. I just ran and ran through the brush until I could not hear them anymore. When I circled back hours later, our house was burning, and Papa was still in the doorway where he had fallen. I tried to reach him, but the heat was too much, and I knew he was already gone. She covered her face with her hands. I could not even bury him properly. I just ran again, took the road west, and I have been walking ever since. Zachary stood and moved to the kitchen area, needing to occupy his hands before the rage building inside him made him do something foolish like ride out into the dark looking for killers. He pulled out bread and cold beef from his food safe, along with cheese and a jar of his neighbor's preserves. He arranged them on a plate and brought them to her. "Eat," he said simply. "We will figure out the rest after you have food in your belly and some rest." Beatrice took the plate with shaking hands and began to eat, slowly at first, then with more urgency. He turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with preparing coffee. The domesticity of the action felt strange after so many months of cooking only for himself, but also somehow right. The house had been too quiet for too long. When she had finished eating, color had returned to her cheeks, and though her eyes were still haunted, some of the immediate shock seemed to have faded. She looked around the room properly for the first time, taking in the simple furniture, the neat stacks of books on a shelf, the rifle mounted above the door, and the maps of the territory pinned to one wall. "You live here alone?" she asked. "For the past 6 months, yes. Before that, my brother Sam lived here too, but he got gold fever and headed to California. I get letters now and then. He is doing well enough out there, working a claim with some partners." Zachary poured coffee into 2 cups and brought them both to the chairs by the fire. "Before you ask, yes, I know how to behave properly around a lady without a chaperone. My mother raised me right before the fever took her when I was 15. And given your circumstances, propriety seems less important than safety right now." Beatrice accepted the coffee cup, wrapping both hands around it as if drawing comfort from its warmth. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Owens. Most men would not have opened their gate to a strange woman weeping in the dark." "Most men are fools then," he said bluntly. "And call me Zachary. Mr. Owens was my father, and he has been gone these 10 years. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire and the distant sound of coyotes the only interruption. Zachary studied her face in the firelight, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the grief. This was not a woman who would stay broken for long. "What will you do?" he asked finally. "Do you have family elsewhere you can go to?" Beatrice shook her head. "My mother's sister lives in St. Louis, but we have not corresponded in years. She disapproved of our coming west. I have no money for travel even if I wanted to face her judgment. Everything we owned burned with the house." She straightened her shoulders, and he saw the steel enter her spine. "I will find work in Cherry Creek. I can cook, clean, so I helped Papa run our homestead. I am not afraid of hard work." "Cherry Creek is not kind to women alone," Zachary said carefully. "The respectable work is scarce, and the other kind is plentiful. With your looks, you will have every saloon owner in town making offers you do not want to hear." She flinched but did not look away. "Then what do you suggest, Zachary? I cannot stay here. It would ruin both our reputations." He had been thinking about this since she first told him her story, an idea forming that was probably crazy but felt right nonetheless. "You need a place to stay and recover. I need help running this ranch. Sam left me to manage everything alone, and I am behind on work. The garden is half wild, the chicken coop needs repairs, and I have been living on beans and coffee for weeks because I cannot cook worth a damn. What if you stayed on as my housekeeper? I would pay you fair wages, give you your own room, and it would be a proper arrangement. Come winter, if you still want to move on, you will have money saved and time to have figured out your next step. Beatrice stared at him. You would trust a complete stranger in your home. You are not the one who murdered your father and burned your house, he pointed out. And I am a good judge of character. I see a strong woman who has had the worst day of her life and needs a chance to catch her breath. I am offering that chance, nothing more and nothing less. What do you say? She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she nodded slowly. I accept, but I insist on earning my keep properly. I will work hard for whatever you pay me. I would expect nothing less, he said, and found himself almost smiling for the first time in months. That night, Zachary gave Beatrice his own bedroom and took Sam's old room across the hall. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sound of another person in his house, the quiet movements as she settled in, the soft sound that might have been more crying muffled into a pillow. He stared at the ceiling beams and wondered what he had gotten himself into. But when he finally drifted off to sleep, it was the most peaceful rest he had experienced in half a year. The next morning dawned bright and cool, autumn beginning to assert itself across the Colorado high country. Zachary woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, which was so unexpected that for a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then memory returned, and he dressed quickly, splashing water on his face from the basin before heading to the kitchen. Beatrice stood at his stove, her hair now properly pinned up, wearing the same dress as yesterday but somehow looking more composed. She had found his apron and tied it around her waist, and she moved around the kitchen with efficient purpose, clearly having already explored enough to know where he kept his supplies. "Good morning," she said without turning. "I hope you do not mind that I made myself useful. I could not sleep much longer and cooking helped settle my mind." "Mind? I am grateful. How did you sleep otherwise?" "As well as could be expected." She brought plates to the small table, loaded with bacon, eggs, and biscuits that looked infinitely better than anything he had ever produced. "I kept thinking about Papa, but I also thought about what you said, about having time to catch my breath. It has been a long while since anyone offered me kindness without wanting something in return." They sat down to eat, and Zachary found himself studying her in the morning light. The fear from last night had been replaced with something more complex, a mixture of grief and determination. Her hands were steady as she cut her food. "I need to ride into Cherry Creek today," he said. "Report what happened to Sheriff Morrison. He should know about the claim jumpers, even if there is not much he can do about it. Would you be willing to come with me? You can give him the details better than I can." Beatrice paled slightly but nodded. "Yes, they should be held accountable, even if justice seems unlikely in this territory." "It is unlikely but not impossible," Zachary said. "Morrison is a decent man, just overworked. And I want to stop by the land office too, see if there is any record of someone else trying to file a claim on your father's property." They finished breakfast, and Beatrice insisted on washing the dishes while Zachary went out to ready his wagon. He had a good team of horses, a matched pair of bay geldings named Thunder and Storm that his brother had named during a dramatic mood. He hitched them efficiently, then went to check on the rest of his stock while he waited. The ranch was not large, but it was productive. He had about 50 head of cattle scattered across his grazing land, a dozen horses in various stages of training, chickens, and 2 milk cows. He made his living primarily by breaking and selling horses, with the cattle as a backup income. It was steady work but lonely, especially since Sam left. When Beatrice emerged from the house, He helped her up onto the wagon seat, noting the way she moved carefully, her body still exhausted from yesterday's ordeal. The ride to Cherry Creek took about an hour, following a decent road that wound through scrubland and scattered pines. They talked little, but it was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one. Cherry Creek was a typical territorial town, grown up around mining and ranching, with a main street of businesses and houses scattered beyond. The mountains rose dramatically to the west, their peaks already touched with early snow. Zachary guided the wagon to the sheriff's office, a sturdy building near the center of town. Sheriff Tom Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much of the worst in people. He listened intently as Beatrice recounted her story, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Bastards," he muttered when she finished. "Pardon my language, Miss Everett, but that is what they are. This is the third claim jumping in as many months. They are getting bolder, hitting properties further from town." "Can you do anything?" Zachary asked. Morrison sighed heavily. "I can form a posse, ride out to the Everett homestead and look for tracks, but I will be honest with you both. These men are careful. They cover their faces, they scatter after the deed is done, and tracking in this territory is near impossible unless you catch them fresh. I will do what I can, but I would not want to give you false hope, Miss Everett." "I understand," Beatrice said quietly, "but at least there will be a record. At least someone will know what happened to my father." Morrison nodded respectfully. "I will ride out there this afternoon with my deputy. We will do what we can to give your father a proper burial too, if the fire has not made that impossible. You have my word on that." "Thank you, Sheriff," Beatrice said, and Zachary saw tears threatening again but held back through sheer force of will. They left the sheriff's office and walked down the street to the land office, where a thin clerk with spectacles looked up their information. The Everett claim had been properly filed and paid for, all legal and correct. No other claims had been filed on that property, which meant the men who killed William Everett had been acting purely out of greed or malice, not even bothering with a pretense of legality. "Will you file a claim to inherit the property?" the clerk asked Beatrice. She looked startled, as if she had not even considered it. "I suppose I could. I am his only heir." "You should," Zachary said firmly. "Do not let them steal what your father died for." So Beatrice filed the paperwork, her hand shaking slightly as she signed her name. The clerk stamped the documents officially and gave her copies. As they left the land office, she clutched the papers like a lifeline. "I own land now," she said wonderingly. "Land I cannot even go back to safely." "Not yet," Zachary agreed, "but someday maybe things change." They stopped at the general store next, where Zachary insisted on buying Beatrice 2 new dresses, undergarments, and other necessities. She protested at first, but he pointed out that she could not work on a ranch in a single dress that was half burned at the hem. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said. "You can pay me back if it makes you feel better." The store owner, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind woman who had known Zachary since he first arrived in the territory. She took one look at Beatrice's worn appearance and immediately ushered her to the back of the store where the women's clothing was kept, clucking sympathetically. When they emerged half an hour later, Beatrice carried a bundle wrapped in paper and had a slightly overwhelmed expression. "She was very generous," Beatrice told Zachary. "She gave me extra things and would not let you pay full price. She said any friend of yours was a friend of hers." "Mrs. Henderson is good people," Zachary said simply. They had lunch at the town's small restaurant, a place run by a Chinese family that made the best noodles Zachary had ever tasted. Beatrice seemed fascinated by the food, having never tried Chinese cooking before. For a brief time over the meal, he saw her smile, and it transformed her face entirely. "Thank you," she said as they finished eating, "for all of this. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." "You had every right to expect basic human decency," Zachary replied. "The fact that it seems exceptional says more about the world than about me." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them lost in thought. When they arrived home in the late afternoon, Beatrice immediately set about exploring the property more thoroughly, making notes about what needed attention. Zachary watched her move through his garden, bending to examine plants, and realized that having her here felt natural in a way he could not quite explain. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Beatrice proved to be as hardworking as she had claimed, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, then tackling the endless list of tasks a ranch required. She repaired the chicken coop, weeded and organized the garden, sewed curtains for the windows, and cooked meals that made Zachary remember what it was like to actually enjoy food instead of just viewing it as fuel. For his part, Zachary worked his horses, repaired fencing, and rode out to check on his cattle. But he found himself arranging his schedule so that he was never too far from the house for too long, some protective instinct making him reluctant to leave Beatrice alone for extended periods. She never mentioned the men who had killed her father, but he sometimes caught her staring toward the eastern horizon with an expression of such loss that it made his chest ache. 2 weeks after Beatrice's arrival, Sheriff Morrison rode out to the ranch with news. They had found tracks at the Everett homestead and had followed them to a camp about 20 miles south. There had been a confrontation, and 2 of the claim jumpers were now dead, shot while resisting arrest. 3 others had escaped, and 1 had been captured and was now in the Cherry Creek jail awaiting trial. "The one we caught is singing like a bird," Morrison said, accepting the coffee Beatrice offered him, "trying to save his own neck by implicating the others. Says the whole thing was organized by a man named Dutch Keller, a known outlaw with a gang that works the territory between here and New Mexico. Keller was not at the camp when we raided it, but we are on the lookout for him now." "And my father?" Beatrice asked quietly. Morrison's expression softened. "We buried him proper, Miss Everett, found enough of him to do it right, said words over his grave and marked it with a good cross. When it is safe, I will take you out there to pay your respects." Beatrice nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means more than I can say." After Morrison left, Beatrice excused herself and went to her room. Zachary heard the quiet sounds of weeping through the door and wanted desperately to comfort her, but knew she needed this private grief. Instead, he sat on the porch and watched the sun set, thinking about loss and loneliness and the strange way life could change in an instant. That night at dinner, Beatrice was composed again, though her eyes were red. "I have been thinking," she said as they ate the roast chicken she had prepared, "about my father's land. I want to rebuild eventually, make something of the property he died for, but I do not know how. I do not know anything about filing claims or building houses or any of it." "I could help you," Zachary offered, "when the time is right. It would take money and manpower, but it is not impossible. You could raise cattle there or crops. The creek would provide good water." "Why would you help me do that?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly. "What is in it for you?" It was a fair question. Zachary set down his fork and thought about how to answer honestly. "At first, because it is the right thing to do, because your father was murdered for that land and letting it go to waste would be another kind of injustice. But also because in these past 2 weeks, you have made this ranch feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. I have been alone too long, Beatrice. Having you here has reminded me what it is like to have someone to talk to share meals with. I suppose I am helping you because I hope you might stay in the territory, even if eventually you rebuild on your own land." Beatrice looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You are a strange man, Zachary Owens. Good, but strange. Most men would have tried to take advantage by now." "Then you have known the wrong men," he said simply. Something changed between them that night, a subtle shift from employer and employee, or even just host and guest, towards something that felt more like partnership. They began sitting together in the evenings after chores were done, talking about their pasts, their hopes, their losses. Zachary learned that Beatrice had once wanted to be a school teacher, but had given up that dream to help her father after her mother died. She learned that he had come west after his father died, unable to bear staying in Ohio where everything reminded him of what he had lost. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. "Coming west, sometimes," he admitted. "When winters are brutal or when I go weeks without seeing another soul. But mostly, no. There is something about this land that feels like possibility, like you can reinvent yourself into whoever you want to be." "I would like to believe that," Beatrice said softly. "But right now I feel like my old life ended with Papa's death, and I do not know what comes next." "What comes next is whatever you decide," Zachary said. "You get to write your own story from here." As autumn deepened into October, the work shifted to preparing for winter. Zachary taught Beatrice how to shoot, starting with his revolver and graduating to the rifle. She proved to be a natural shot, her hand steady and her eye keen. They spent hours setting up targets and practicing, and he found himself admiring not just her skill but her determination to learn, to never be helpless again. "I never want to run from anyone again," she told him one afternoon after hitting a distant target 3 times in a row. "If those men come back, I want to be able to defend myself." "They would be fools to come back," Zachary said, "but I am glad you are learning anyway. Every person in this territory should know how to shoot." They put up vegetables from the garden, preserved fruits, salted meat, and filled the root cellar with supplies. Beatrice proved skilled at all of it, and Zachary found himself watching her work with an emotion he was not quite ready to name. She had been with him for 6 weeks now, and the thought of her leaving had become increasingly unbearable. The realization that he was falling in love with her came one evening in mid-October. They were bringing in firewood together, arms loaded with split logs when Beatrice tripped over a root and stumbled. Zachary dropped his wood instantly to catch her, and suddenly they were standing very close, his hands on her arms, her face turned up to his. The moment stretched out, charged with something electric, and he saw in her eyes that she felt it too. "Zachary," she whispered, and the way she said his name made his heart pound. But then she stepped back, looking flustered, and they both bent to gather the dropped firewood without speaking. The moment had passed, but something had been acknowledged, even if unspoken. That night, Zachary lay awake in Sam's old room and admitted the truth to himself. He loved Beatrice Everett. He loved her strength, her resilience, her quiet determination. He loved the way she hummed while cooking, the way she argued with him about politics and philosophy, the way she had brought life and warmth back into his empty house. But he had no idea if she felt the same, and he was terrified of ruining what they had by admitting feelings she might not share. The next morning at breakfast, Beatrice seemed distracted, pushing food around her plate without eating much. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at him directly. "We need to talk about yesterday," she said. Zachary's stomach dropped. "All right." "I have not been honest with you about my feelings," she continued, her voice steady despite the flush rising in her cheeks. "I think you should know that living here with you these past weeks has been more than just employment or even friendship for me." You have shown me kindness and respect that I did not know existed in men after watching my father struggle alone and then die at the hands of strangers. I find myself thinking about you constantly, about whether you might feel the same way I do, but I am afraid to hope because hope has been dangerous lately. Zachary felt like he could not breathe. How do you feel? He managed to ask. Beatrice met his eyes without wavering. I think I am falling in love with you. I know it is too soon. I know my judgment might be compromised by grief and gratitude, but I cannot deny what I feel. If you do not feel the same, please tell me now so I can guard my heart better. He was around the table and pulling her to her feet before he even realized he had moved. I feel the same, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, Beatrice. I have been falling in love with you since that first night when you showed me that strength and vulnerability could exist in the same person. I have been terrified to tell you because I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured. I do not feel obligated, she said. And then she was reaching up, and he was leaning down, and they were kissing, tentatively at first and then with growing certainty. She tasted like coffee and hope, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary felt like his whole world had shifted on its axis. We should probably take this slowly, Beatrice said, though she had not moved away from his arms. Court properly. Make sure this is real and not just proximity and circumstance. I will court you as properly as any man ever courted a woman, Zachary promised. But I already know what I feel is real. I have been alone long enough to know the difference between loneliness and love. From that day forward, everything changed and yet nothing changed. They still worked together, ate together, spent evenings talking, but now there was an acknowledged tenderness between them. Zachary brought her wildflowers from his rides, despite the advancing season making them scarce. Beatrice mended his clothes with extra care, embroidering his initials on his shirts. They held hands while sitting on the porch, and sometimes they kissed, sweet and chaste but full of promise. In early November, a cold snap brought the first real snow. Zachary woke to find Beatrice standing at the kitchen window, watching the white flakes fall with a troubled expression. "What is wrong?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "I was thinking about Papa," she said quietly, "about how he loved the first snow. He would always say it was the earth putting on a clean dress. I wish he could have known you, Zachary. I wish he could have seen me this happy." Zachary wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into him. "Tell me about him," he said. "Tell me what he was like." So she did, sharing memories of her father over breakfast, laughing and crying in equal measure. William Everett had been a dreamer, an optimist, a man who believed in fresh starts and hard work. He had loved his daughter fiercely and had raised her to be independent and strong. Hearing about him made Zachary wish he had known the man, had been able to ask his permission to court his daughter properly. "He would have liked you," Beatrice said, as if reading his thoughts. "He always said to judge a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. You took me in when I had nothing to offer, treated me with respect and kindness. Papa would have approved." The snow continued through the day, and by evening they were snowed in properly, the world transformed into a white silence. They sat by the fire that night, and Zachary found the courage to speak what had been building in his heart. "Beatrice," he said, taking her hand, "I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, and by society's standards, that is too soon for what I am about to say. But we are not living by society's standards out here. We are living by our own. I love you. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch or on your father's land or wherever be you want to be. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes, good or bad, as partners. Will you marry me?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you. I love you too, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." They kissed then, deeper than before, and Zachary felt like every lonely year of his life had been leading to this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Beatrice was laughing. "We will have to wait until the snow clears to go to town and find a preacher," she pointed out. "We will wait as long as we need to do it properly," Zachary agreed. "But I am going to consider you my fiancé starting right now, if that is acceptable." "It is more than acceptable," Beatrice said, and kissed him again to prove it. The snow lasted 3 days, trapping them in beautiful isolation. They spent the time planning their future, talking about what they would do with the ranch, whether they would eventually rebuild on the Everett property or sell it, how many children they hoped to have. Beatrice admitted she had always wanted a large family, and Zachary confessed he had dreamed of the same but had given up hope after Sam left. "We will have our family," Beatrice said firmly. "We will build something good here, something Papa would be proud of." When the snow finally cleared enough for travel, they rode into Cherry Creek together, both dressed in their best clothes. The preacher, Reverend James Walsh, was a jovial man in his 60s who had known Zachary for years. He listened to their request to be married and smiled broadly. "I wondered when you would find someone to settle down with, Zachary," he said. "And Miss Everett, I am glad to see you looking so well. Sheriff Morrison told me about your tragedy. It does my heart good to see something positive coming from such darkness." They were married in the small church 3 days later, on a clear November afternoon with golden light streaming through the windows. Mrs. Henderson served as witness, along with Sheriff Morrison and his wife. Beatrice wore a new dress she had sewn herself, a simple but elegant design in deep blue that made her eyes shine. Zachary wore his best suit, pressed and brushed, his hair slicked back and his beard freshly trimmed. As he watched Beatrice walk down the aisle toward him, Zachary felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman who had appeared at his gate weeping and broken was now radiant with hope and love. That she had chosen him, trusted him, loved him, felt like a miracle. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was witnessed by their small gathering with warm applause. The wedding dinner was held at the restaurant where they had eaten Chinese food months before, and the owners insisted on preparing a special feast in celebration. The small group ate and laughed and toasted the new couple, and as evening fell, Zachary and Beatrice rode back to the ranch as husband and wife. That night, as they lay together for the first time in the room that was now truly theirs, Beatrice traced her fingers along Zachary's jaw and smiled. "I never thought I would be happy again after Papa died," she said softly. "I thought that part of my life was over, but you gave me a new beginning, Zachary. You opened your gate and your heart, and you saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Zachary replied, pulling her close. "I was dying of loneliness out here, turning into a hermit. You brought me back to life." They made love then, tender and passionate, learning each other with care and wonder. And afterward, holding his wife as she drifted to sleep, Zachary thought about the strange path that had led them here. If he had been in town that evening, if he had been working in a far field, if he had ignored the sound of weeping, none of this would have happened. But he had been exactly where he needed to be, exactly when he needed to be there. The winter that followed was hard, as Colorado winters always were, but Zachary and Beatrice faced it together, warm and safe in their home. They spent long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, planning their spring projects. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies and hearts with growing intimacy. And as the snow piled high outside, they built a partnership based on mutual respect, shared work, and deepening love. In February, a U.S. Marshal passed through Cherry Creek with news that Dutch Keller and the remainder of his gang had been killed in a shootout with law enforcement near the New Mexico border. The man who had been captured after the raid on the Everett homestead had been tried and sentenced to 20 years in prison for his part in William Everett's murder. Sheriff Morrison rode out to the ranch personally to tell them, knowing they would want to know. Justice is not always swift in this territory, but sometimes it catches up, Morrison said as they sat in the warm kitchen drinking coffee. Thought you should know that the men who killed your father are no longer a threat to anyone, Mrs. Owens. Beatrice, who had recently started feeling confident using her new married name, nodded solemnly. Thank you, Sheriff. It does not bring Papa back, but knowing they cannot hurt anyone else brings some peace. After Morrison left, Beatrice stood at the window looking toward the east, where her father's homestead lay buried under snow. I think I would like to rebuild there eventually, she said. Not to live, but to make it productive again. Maybe lease it to a good family or run cattle on it. Something that honors what Papa tried to do. Then that is what we will do, Zachary promised, coming to stand beside her. Come spring, we will ride out there together and we will make plans. As winter gave way to early spring, Beatrice began to suspect she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening in March as they prepared for bed, her voice nervous and excited all at once. Are you certain? He asked, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, she replied. But all the signs are there. I think we will have a baby by late October. Zachary pulled her into his arms, overcome with emotion. A baby, he repeated wonderingly. Our baby. Are you happy? Beatrice asked, looking up at him. Happy does not begin to cover it, he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You have given me everything, Beatrice. A home, a partner, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in the territory. They rode into Cherry Creek the next week so Beatrice could see Doc Murray, a gruff but competent physician who confirmed her pregnancy and gave her instructions for staying healthy through the coming months. On the ride back, Beatrice was quieter than usual. What are you thinking? Zachary asked. That I wish Papa could know he is going to be a grandfather, she said sadly. He always talked about grandchildren, about the family we would build. It seems cruel that he was so close to seeing this dream realized but did not make it. He knew you would have a family someday, Zachary said gently. And I think, wherever he is, he knows about this baby and is happy for you, for us. As Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, Zachary became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and work less. She argued that she was pregnant, not ill, but secretly she was touched by his concern. They prepared a nursery in what had been Sam's room, sewing baby clothes and building a cradle. Mrs. Henderson gave them a baby shower in town, and Beatrice was overwhelmed by the generosity of the community that had embraced her. In May, true to their promise, they rode out to the Everett homestead together. The burned remains of the cabin stood like a skeleton against the sky, but the land itself was beautiful, with the creek running clear and strong and wildflowers beginning to bloom across the meadow. They found William Everett's grave, marked with the cross Sheriff Morrison had placed, and Beatrice knelt beside it while Zachary stood nearby to give her privacy. "Hello, Papa," she said softly, placing wildflowers on the grave. "I wanted you to meet my husband, Zachary. He is a good man, the best I have ever known besides you. We are going to have a baby, Papa, your grandchild. We are going to make something of this land you loved. I promise we will make you proud." When she stood, tears streaming down her face, Zachary held her while she cried. Then they walked the property together, discussing possibilities. They decided to rebuild a small cabin that could be used by a tenant farmer, someone who would work the land and split the profits with them. It would take time and money, but they would make it happen. The summer was busy with ranch work and preparations for the baby. Zachary hired a young man named Peter Grant to help with the heavier labor, a recent arrival to the territory who was eager for steady work. With Peter's help, they began the process of rebuilding on the Everett land, hauling materials and starting construction on a simple but solid cabin. Beatrice, now visibly pregnant, supervised from a chair in the shade, directing the work and keeping everyone supplied with water and food. She had blossomed with pregnancy, her face radiant, her happiness evident in every smile. Watching her, Zachary felt his heart swell with love so profound it sometimes took his breath away. In August, Sam wrote from California with news that he was getting married to a woman he had met there and planned to stay out west permanently. He asked Zachary to sell his share of the ranch to fund his new life. Zachary wrote back immediately, offering to send the money and wishing his brother well. Though he would miss the possibility of Sam returning someday, he was happy for his brother's new beginning. "We will have to expand the herd to make up for buying out Sam's share," Beatrice said practically when Zachary told her about the letter. "But we can do it. This ranch can support more cattle with proper management." "Since when did you become an expert on ranch management?" Zachary teased. "Since I married a rancher and started paying attention," she replied, swatting his arm playfully. "I have been reading those books on your shelf, learning about cattle and horses and land management. If I am going to be a rancher's wife, I intend to be a useful one." "You are already the most useful wife a man could ask for," Zachary said, pulling her close despite her protruding belly. "And the most beautiful." As Beatrice's due date approached, Doc Murray suggested she move into town for the final weeks of her pregnancy, but she refused. "I want my baby born in our home," she said firmly. "With my husband beside me, not in some boarding house with my husband miles away." So they prepared as best they could, with Mrs. Henderson agreeing to come stay at the ranch when Beatrice's time came, bringing her experience as a midwife. Peter was instructed on when to ride for Doc Murray, and Zachary found himself both excited and terrified as October arrived. The baby came on a clear October evening, almost exactly a year after Zachary had found Beatrice weeping at his gate. The labor was long and difficult, and Zachary spent hours pacing the main room while Mrs. Henderson and Doc Murray attended to Beatrice. Her screams of pain tore at his heart, making him feel helpless and desperate. He had never been more afraid in his life than during those hours when his wife's life and his child's life hung in the balance. Finally, as the sun set in a blaze of autumn color, a baby's cry split the air. Zachary burst into the bedroom to find Mrs. Henderson holding a squalling, red-faced infant while Doc Murray tended to an exhausted but smiling Beatrice. "You have a son," Mrs. Henderson announced, beaming. "A big, healthy boy." Zachary approached the bed in a daze. Beatrice looked tired beyond measure, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But she had never been more beautiful. She held out her arms, and Mrs. Henderson placed the baby carefully in them. Then Beatrice looked up at Zachary with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny person in his wife's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his little fists waving in the air. He had a shock of dark hair and his mother's nose, and Zachary felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce and immediate it shook him to his core. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately gripped it with surprising strength. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names endlessly but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. "William," he said, "for your father, William Zachary Owens." Beatrice's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Papa would have loved that," she said. "Yes, William Zachary Owens. Billy for short, maybe, when he is small." "Billy," Zachary repeated, testing it out. The baby seemed to respond to the sound, turning his head slightly. "Hello, Billy." "Welcome to the world, son." Doc Murray and Mrs. Henderson left them alone after ensuring both mother and baby were doing well, with instructions to send for them if any problems arose. Zachary lay down carefully beside Beatrice, the three of them together in the bed, marveling at the new life they had created. "A year ago I was alone in this house," Zachary said quietly. "Now I have a wife and son. How did I get so lucky?" "We got lucky together," Beatrice corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was broken and lost, and you helped me heal. Now look at us. We have built something beautiful from tragedy." Baby Billy nursed hungrily, figured out quickly by his determined mother, and then fell asleep between his parents, tiny and perfect and full of potential. Zachary watched his son sleep and thought about the future. He would teach this boy to ride and shoot, to work hard and treat people with respect. He would make sure Billy knew about his grandfather William Everett, about the brave man who had tried to build a life in this hard territory. He would raise his son to be strong and kind, just like the woman he had married. The first months of Billy's life were exhausting but joyful. Zachary learned to function on little sleep, waking to help with nighttime feedings, changing diapers, walking the floor with a fussy baby. Beatrice recovered slowly from the birth, and he made sure she rested as much as possible while still managing the household. Peter continued to help with ranch work, and they hired another hand in the spring to manage the increased cattle herd. By the time Billy was 6 months old, the new cabin on the Everett property was complete, and they had found a good family to tenant it, a young couple from Kansas named the Thompsons who were eager for a fresh start. The arrangement worked well, with the Thompsons farming the land and running a small herd of cattle, sending half the profits to Zachary and Beatrice quarterly. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy but satisfying. Billy grew quickly, a happy baby who laughed easily and seemed fascinated by everything around him. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's temperament, calm and observant. Zachary had never imagined he could love anything as much as he loved his son, except perhaps the woman who had given him this gift. When Billy was a year old, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting everyone from town who had been part of their journey. Sheriff Morrison came with his wife, Mrs. Henderson brought her famous apple pie. Doc Murray told medical stories that made everyone laugh, and even Peter brought his new sweetheart, a girl from town named Sarah. They ate and celebrated, and as Zachary watched Billy toddle around on uncertain legs, investigating everything with fearless curiosity, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and Billy was asleep in his crib, Zachary and Beatrice sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about that night?" Beatrice asked. "When I showed up at your gate?" "All the time," Zachary admitted. "I think about how easily I might have ignored you, might have stayed inside and pretended I had not heard anything. How different everything would be if I had made that choice." "But you did not," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "You opened the gate. You opened your heart. You saved me, Zachary, and in doing so, you saved yourself too. We saved each other." "We did," he agreed, "and we built something better than either of us could have built alone." 2 years later, Beatrice gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth. She had her father's dark hair and a fierce personality that made itself known from day one. Billy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Zachary found himself with a family that filled every corner of his heart and home. The ranch continued to prosper. Their cattle herd grew. Zachary's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the territory, and the Everett property under the Thompsons' management became productive and profitable. They added rooms to the house to accommodate their growing family, built a proper barn, and put in irrigation that made the garden flourish. When Billy was 5 and Grace was 3, Colorado became a state, and Cherry Creek celebrated with a huge festival. The Owens family attended together, and Billy was fascinated by the speeches about statehood and progress. That night, tucking his son into bed, Zachary tried to explain what it meant. "It means Colorado is not just a territory anymore," he said. "It is a real state, part of the United States of America. It means things are becoming more settled, more civilized." "Is that good?" Billy asked. "I think so," Zachary said, though part of him felt nostalgic for the wilder days. "It means more laws, more protection, more opportunities. By the time you are grown, this will be a very different place." "Will we always live here?" Billy asked. "On the ranch, as long as you want to," Zachary promised. "This ranch will be yours someday, yours and Grace's. It is your inheritance, your legacy. Your mother and I have built this for you." 5 years after Grace's birth, Beatrice surprised them all with a third pregnancy, delivering twin boys they named Samuel James and Thomas Henry, after Zachary's brother and Beatrice's father, respectively. The names honored the family that had come before while celebrating the family they had built. The house was loud and chaotic with 4 children, but it was also full of love and laughter. Billy grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with his father. Grace was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding horses almost before she could walk properly. The twins were mischievous and inseparable, getting into constant trouble but charming their way out of it with identical grins. Zachary often thought about how his life had changed that September evening in 1878 when he heard weeping at his gate. He was no longer a lonely cowboy working a ranch by himself, slowly turning bitter and isolated. He was a husband, a father, a man with deep roots in his community and a legacy to leave behind. Every bit of it traced back to the choice he had made to open his gate to a woman in need. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Beatrice back to the Everett homestead. The Thompsons had moved on, and they had just rented the property to a new family. They walked to William Everett's grave, which Zachary had maintained carefully over the years and placed fresh flowers. "Papa, it has been a good 10 years, Beatrice said softly, kneeling by the grave. "We have 4 children now, can you imagine? Billy is so much like you, serious and hardworking but with a big heart. Grace is fierce and independent, never backing down from anything. And the twins are joy personified, finding happiness in every moment. I wish you could have known them. I wish they could have known you." Zachary put his hand on her shoulder as she spoke, his own throat tight with emotion. Though he had never met William Everett, he felt connected to the man through his daughter, through the land they had preserved, through the grandchildren who carried his name. "We are doing well," Beatrice continued. "The ranch is successful, we are happy, and we are raising our children to be good people who contribute to their community. I think you would be proud. I hope you would be proud." They stayed a while longer, then walked back through the property. The new tenant family, the Johnsons, had done good work already, planting crops and making repairs. It filled Zachary with satisfaction to see the land productive and cared for, fulfilling the dream William Everett had died protecting. That night, lying in bed with Beatrice in his arms, Zachary reflected on the decade they had shared. 10 years, he said wonderingly. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. It has been a good 10 years, Beatrice said, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. Hard sometimes, sad sometimes, but mostly good. You kept your promise, Zachary. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. You turned my tragedy into triumph. We did it together, he corrected, tilting her face up to kiss her. Everything we have, we built together. I love you, Beatrice, more with every passing year. And I love you, she replied. My lonely cowboy who opened his gate and his heart, best decision either of us ever made. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Billy grew into a fine young man who took over more and more ranch responsibilities, working side by side with his father and showing a natural talent for horse training that exceeded even Zachary's skill. Grace eventually channeled her fierce energy into becoming a teacher, opening a school in Cherry Creek and bringing education to children throughout the region. The twins, inseparable as always, went into business together, opening a store that served the growing community. By the time Zachary and Beatrice celebrated their 25th anniversary, they were grandparents twice over, with Billy married to a kind woman named Ellen, who had given them 2 granddaughters. The ranch house had been expanded again and again, accommodating children, grandchildren, hired hands, and visitors. It had become a hub of activity and life, exactly what Zachary had dreamed of during his lonely years. On warm evenings, Zachary and Beatrice would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, just as they had done for years. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped together. They would watch their grandchildren play in the yard, hear Billy and Ellen laughing in the house, and feel the satisfaction of a life well lived. You remember how scared I was that first night? Beatrice asked one evening as the sky turned gold and pink. How convinced I was that my life was over, I remember, Zachary said. And I remember thinking I was too broken by loneliness to ever connect with anyone again. We were both wrong, Beatrice observed with a smile. Thankfully, Zachary agreed. As their 30th anniversary approached, Zachary planned something special. With Billy's help, he arranged a trip back to the Everett homestead, where he had secretly commissioned the building of a memorial. When they arrived, Beatrice gasped to see a beautiful stone marker in place of the simple wooden cross that had marked her father's grave. The stone read, William Thomas Everett, beloved father and pioneer, 1822–1877. He built his dream in this territory, and his daughter carries it forward. His legacy lives in the land he loved and the family who remember him. Beatrice wept, but they were tears of joy and remembrance rather than grief. She knelt by the stone and traced her father's name with her fingers. Thank you, she said to Zachary. Thank you for making sure he is remembered properly. He gave me you, Zachary said simply. He raised the woman I love. That deserves to be honored. They visited the homestead regularly after that, bringing grandchildren to hear stories about the grandfather they had never met, teaching them about the history of the land and the sacrifices that had been made. The property continued to be productive under various tenants, generating income that they put away for their children's and grandchildren's futures. When Zachary turned 60, he began to slow down, his body showing the effects of decades of hard ranch work. But his mind remained sharp, and his heart remained full. He taught his grandsons to ride and shoot, passed on his horse training knowledge to anyone willing to learn, and spent long evenings telling stories to any child who would sit still long enough to listen. Beatrice remained active and vibrant, her hair now silver but her green eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. She managed the household with efficiency, hosted regular family dinners that brought everyone together, and maintained an extensive correspondence with friends and family scattered across the country. On their 40th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories and tears. As Zachary looked around at the crowd of people who existed, because he had opened his gate to a weeping woman 40 years before, he felt the weight of his blessings almost overwhelm him. That night, after everyone had either gone home or settled into guest rooms, Zachary and Beatrice walked out to the gate where they had first met. The moon was full, casting silver light over the land. They stood hand in hand, looking out at the territory they had made their own. 40 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. We have been together for 40 years. We have built a life, raised children, created a legacy, and it all started right here at this gate. Best gate in all of Colorado, Zachary said with a smile. Maybe in the whole country. Beatrice laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been 4 decades earlier. You are ridiculous. I am in love, he corrected. Still, after all these years, more even. They kissed in the moonlight, two people who had found each other in darkness and had spent 40 years building toward the light. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully, full of family and love and the promise of generations yet to come. As they walked back to the house arm in arm, Zachary thought about the young man he had been, lonely and hardening into bitterness, slowly losing hope that his life would be anything more than work and solitude. He thought about the terrified young woman who had collapsed at his gate, convinced her life was over, unable to see a future beyond tragedy. Neither of them could have imagined then what they would build together. The ranch that now spread across hundreds of acres. The children who had grown into remarkable adults. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward into a new century. The community they had helped build and strengthen. The love that had sustained them through good times and bad, through loss and triumph, through every challenge life had thrown their way. It had all started with a simple choice: to open a gate to a stranger in need. And from that one act of kindness had flowed 40 years of love, partnership, family, and legacy. As they prepared for bed that night, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of 4 decades together, Beatrice paused and looked at Zachary seriously. I need you to know something, she said. You saved my life that night, not just physically, though you did that too. But you saved me from despair, from giving up, from believing that goodness and love did not exist in the world. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. That strangers can become family. That tragedy can transform into joy. Thank you, Zachary. Thank you for hearing my tears, for opening your gate, for opening your heart. Zachary pulled her close, this woman who had been his wife, his partner, his best friend, his whole world for 40 years. Thank you for crying loud enough for me to hear, he replied. Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you, Beatrice. Today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left, I will love you. They held each other in the lamplight. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by chance and choice, who had become something far greater than the sum of their parts. The house around them was full of the family they had created, the legacy they had built, the love they had nurtured for 4 decades. Outside, the Colorado night settled over the ranch, peaceful and beautiful. The cattle grazed in distant pastures. The horses dozed in the barn. The garden grew quietly in the darkness. And at the gate where it had all begun, where a lonely cowboy had once found a weeping woman and had changed both their lives forever, moonlight gleamed on the worn wood and weathered posts, silent witness to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love. Their story was not just about romance, though romance was certainly part of it. It was about resilience in the face of tragedy, about choosing hope over despair, about the way strangers can become family and family can become a legacy that echoes through generations. It was about the American West, that harsh and beautiful territory where people went to reinvent themselves, to escape the past, to build something new from nothing but determination and sweat and hope. But most of all, it was a love story. A story about a man and a woman who found each other when both needed saving, who chose to build something together rather than face the world alone, who created a family and a home that would endure long after they were gone. It was a story that would be told and retold by their descendants, passed down through the years as inspiration and instruction. The lonely cowboy who had opened his gate to a weeping woman. The broken woman who had trusted a stranger with her safety and her heart. Together, they had built something beautiful in the wild territory of Colorado, something that would last for generations. And it had all begun with the simple sound of weeping in the twilight, and a man who had the courage and compassion to respond. As the years continued to pass, and Zachary and Beatrice moved into their final decades together, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built, they never forgot that first night. They never took for granted the miracle of having found each other. And they never stopped being grateful for the gate that had brought them together, the gate that had changed everything, the gate that had opened not just onto a ranch but onto a whole life full of love and purpose and belonging. Their love story became legend in Cherry Creek and throughout Colorado, told as an example of how tragedy can transform into triumph, how strangers can become soulmates, how one act of kindness can ripple out across generations. And whenever anyone asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they always gave the same answer. They had seen each other clearly from the very beginning, had chosen each other consciously and completely, and had worked every day to honor that choice. On a warm spring day when Zachary was 74 and Beatrice was 67, they sat together on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Billy's daughters had both married and had children of their own, and the ranch house echoed with young voices just as it had when their own children were small. "We did good, didn't we?" Beatrice asked, her hand in his as always. "We did better than good," Zachary replied. "We did extraordinary." And looking around at the thriving ranch, the happy children, the productive land, the loving family, and most of all at the woman beside him who had been his partner in building all of it, Zachary Owens knew beyond any doubt that opening his gate that long ago evening had been the best decision of his entire life. Their story ended not with drama or tragedy but with simple contentment, with the quiet satisfaction of two people who had loved each other well, had raised their family with care, had contributed to their community meaningfully, and had built something lasting from the ashes of grief and the soil of hope. They lived out their final years surrounded by love, respected by their community, and secure in the knowledge that their legacy would continue long after they were gone. When the time came for each of them to pass, they did so knowing they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they had found it. And the gate where they had first met remained standing for generations, carefully preserved by their descendants as a monument to the moment when everything changed, when a lonely cowboy heard a woman weeping and made the choice to open his gate and his heart, changing 2 lives and creating a legacy that would endure.